have to remember that changing prayer, in theory, is not that big a deal. And before the Reform movement, before there's something to respond against, I'm not sure it would have been that big a deal. Let's say that it wasn't the Enlightenment. Let's say it's the 1600s, and like we saw the organ. Somebody wants an organ, or maybe if you wanted to change the prayer service to say, as they did in 1819, Areshet Sifatenu, the utterance of our lips takes the place of the sacrifices, which is entirely consistent with the way the Talmud sees sacrifices. I'm not sure that's so radical. The changing prayer is late in Judaism. It's not a biblical thing. It was a rabbinic structure. We, I think, are more attuned to playing loose with rabbinic things like that, partly because we live in, quote, orthodoxy. Now, remember, orthodoxy is something new. Orthodoxy, the idea that there's a true way, that there's a group within the bigger group that knows what's, how it should be, and preserves things the way they're supposed to be, or the way that we do it now is the way it's always been done. I mean, that kind of orthodoxy, which really begins in the early 1800s, kind of as a response to reform, I think, is our perspective. But if you don't come from that perspective, obviously changing Shabbos or getting rid of Shabbos or circumcision, that you've really left the pale. But I don't know if changing prayer is that big a deal.
So you're saying like before this time, you either prayed or you didn't pray, right? If you prayed, then you were part of the people who were part of the orthodoxy, or the people who adhered to the religion. And what exactly was that prayer specifically, or in details, do not really matter.
Well, I mean, I'm saying that think about the Sephardic world, right? It didn't have the Reformation. It didn't have the Holocaust. It doesn't really, in a sense, have, quote, orthodoxy in that sense. It's everyone kind of goes to the same kind of shul. Some people are more observant, some people less observant. They're not necessarily focused on a lot of strictures. That's probably more how it was. There is an article I'll share with you guys called The Beginnings of Orthodoxy. I was just reading it because it kind of relates to this. I'll show it to you. It's by Moshe Samet, The Beginnings of Orthodoxy. And I mean, I just started it, but that's what he's kind of writing about. He wrote it in the 80s. He's an Israeli scholar. I'll share it with you. But that's all I'm saying is we have to be careful of not imagining that changing the prayer service getting rid of. I think for us, the radicalism of getting rid of, of tweaking the prayer service so that it's more, whether that's like the conservative movement did, changing the, Shelo Asani Isha, Shelo Asani Goy to Sha'asani, Yisrael, whatever it is. I mean, that to us seems very radical. Why does it seem very radical? It's really not very radical. I think it seems very radical because it comes with a whole basket filled with other things, which is conservative Judaism or Reform Judaism, and we see them as breakoffs from tradition, which in many ways they are. But I don't know I don't think people would have thought necessarily the same way. I mean, the Chassam Sofer clearly is thinking that way in 1819, not so much in 1819, but a little bit later. He's saying, oh, this is totally a breakoff from Judaism, and they're trying to destroy Judaism, and the prayer service is a sign of that. But I don't know if that's what somebody like Rabbi Chorin or people who are making very slight changes even before that, like this person we're going to see, Mendel Steinhartz, are aiming for. I think what they're aiming for is we want a better prayer service. We want a prayer service that doesn't seem like a balagan, that that doesn't ruffle modern sensibilities. I think we see that as a very radical move because it comes with all Reform Judaism. But I don't know if in itself it's so radical. That's what I'm saying. It's true. The Chassam Sofer, who is responding already to, I mean, the Enlightenment obviously begins in, the late 1700s, mid to late 1700s. So I don't think the Chassam Sofer is just responding to the Hamburg Temple. He's also responding to the Enlightenment, to, Moses Mendelssohn, and to, people that have come before. There's a sense that the modern era is here, and it's taking its toll on traditional Judaism. And so he's right. So I understand his response of circling the wagons, but the danger in that is that you end up making this, and in a certain way, we might have made reform a separate movement. I mean, you could say the opposite way, that reform made orthodoxy separate, but reform caused orthodoxy. But I don't know if somebody like Rabbi, I don't, and just be careful, Rabbi Chorin, let's say, who is seen as a reformer, but he's clearly an enormous Talmid Chacham and means well. I don't think he's trying to get rid of Shabbos or circumcision or kashrut, or I think what he's trying to do is it's a little bit like, I guess, what we would think of as a conservative movement in America, maybe in the 40s, 50s, 60s, trying to make Judaism relate to the people, trying to make it more noble, trying to, and, had there been no reform movement, had conservative Judaism, just popped up in the 1920s and said, we could make the prayer service a lot more meaningful by changing some of the words and by sitting men and women together. I don't know if that would have been so radical. I don't know, because you could make halachic arguments probably for it. It's not like from Moshe, that sitting separately in shul is, from Moshe at Sinai. It actually was made in the temple because of a certain instance that happened. There was lightheadedness, there was frivolity at the Simcha Beit HaShoeva, at the joy of water drawing, in Masechet Sukkah. That's where we get the idea of mechitza from. Now, I'm not saying Jews haven't been, Jews have mostly been praying separately because women didn't come to shul, at least among Eastern Europeans. They didn't, and I don't know when in the Christian, I don't know if in the Christian world they always sat together or not. But you look at the Hamburg Temple. I mean, even in the 1840s, men and women are still sitting separately. It's that's interesting. There is a very radical element that wants to get rid of circumcision and Shabbos, but the idea of making it look more formal and more church-like by moving the bima, which people wrote whole books against, or even changing the prayer service. I'm not sure that it's that radical, right? I mean, what we saw was, especially the 1819 prayer book, was very subtle, right? It didn't take away return the sacrifices. What it did was it tweaked it in a way that I think we might not see as a problem at all. It really wasn't even divergence from prayer. I mean, the words of our lips will replace the sacrifices. It's exactly what the Gemara says. So I just think that I think that we see early reform through the eyes of the Chassam Sofer, through the eyes of those who are responding to it because they see it's an enormous danger, or they perceive that it's an enormous danger, and they basically totally dismiss it. They see it as something incredibly bad, and they just color it all with one brush. And we probably, we easily buy that because we've seen the reform movement today is, obviously a totally different thing. It's not, Rabbi Chorin who knows, everything in Shas and Torah and is Orthodox, but things changing the prayer service or having an organ is fine. And so we see having an organ is so radical because it comes with all of reform, but that's not I don't think that's what it was. The Chassam Sofer did radicalize it, by seeing it the way he did, by saying, this is extremely dangerous and we need to circle the wagons. Was that the right response? I don't know.
So this strain of reform is not questioning the fact that the Torah was given completely on Sinai from God to Moses to the Jewish people. They don't seem to be questioning that.
Well, certainly not the Orthodox, the quote Orthodox rabbis who are now seen as reformers, like Rabbi Horn and maybe others. They certainly don't. Who are the question is, who are we talking about? Does
right. So then I would say that they, of course, I'm from a lens 200 years later,
right.
That they are reformers with a small r. They are not reform, capital R.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the way that I would distinguish what is a reform temple. I mean, because if you look at the prayers, I could name very mainstream Orthodox synagogues where the service is so formal that it's less familiar to me or less comfortable for me than a conservative traditional service, which may be egalitarian, but they do things like we do things. The lay led, it's informal. You want to sing a tune, you sing a tune. Not as and whereas some Orthodox where they wear top hats, they wear
sure.
graduation robes. It has to be the cantor with the choir. That that's Orthodox, but it's obviously less familiar or comfortable to me.
Right.
So I would not, if he is saying that, he's just slight changes in the text of the prayer, then I would say I would not consider him reform. I would consider him a reformer.
Right. Well, it's true that the Hamburg Temple is structured differently, and there might be a choir and there might be a robe. I think there was, and they certainly moved the bima to the front. So there were those things. I mean, they certainly like formality. Formality to them is important. It's almost more important, I think, than the text of the prayer. I think, and Rabbi Horn, certainly, who I think is the most radical voice among the very early Orthodox rabbis who are pro-reform, he clearly sees that as a positive thing. He says, we've lost the formality, which we should have, which is inherently Jewish and a way to honor God, and we've made it into something else. He sees this as, obviously sees it as a positive thing. I don't think he has a hidden agenda of, secularizing. This is the long road to, to a secular Judaism. I don't think that's where he's coming from at all. And who is there to turn to? There just aren't a lot of sort of reform, right? In a way, in a way, these very early reformers are, it's not, I don't know if it's that, it's lay people, I think. The most, the person who's, if there's a leader, it's Israel Jacobson. And early on, he's actually with this rabbi, this rabbi we're going to read is with him. And then he moves to Berlin, Israel Jacobson, and starts the first kind of reform synagogue or minyan. But I don't think, beyond, it's a good question. Is there anybody sort of writing? I think Lieberman is the only one, right? The person who is the author of Noga Tzedek. And we didn't really read, we read the 3 Tshuvot at the beginning. We didn't really read his second half of the book is him writing, Lieberman. Maybe we should look into him a little bit more to see, is he, in a way, he is the reformer, I guess you would say. But I don't think any of this is like we imagine modern, reform in our day. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying changing the prayer service to us seems more radical, perhaps, than it really is. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll be here tomorrow morning, but then after that, I'll be gone for a week. Sorry.
Okay. No, I was just going to say, have a good day.